Welcome to Stephen Frain's Sister. This is episode 5. We are in Tempe, Arizona today, and we have a special guest, and I'm going to let Samantha do the honors.
Hi guys, it's Samantha Bennington here, and today is a very special day. I have my sister-in-law, Tobi Knehr here, and she is Chester Bennington's sister. Say hi, Tobi.
Hi.
Sorry. She's like, do I speak
I
now?
know. Like, do I
know.
say hello now? What do I say?
All of us sitting in this room are survivors of suicide. I know that you are a survivor on multi-levels. What I really want to touch base on is surviving trying.
Right.
We're surviving the passing of Chester, and you're also surviving your own life and
Right.
fighting for your life.
Right.
That to me is very important to share because I think we can help save lives this way as survivors.
Right. It's definitely scary when you think that it's not going to work because there's going to be repercussions for what your actions were. Whether it be the emotional and the trauma that you've put your family through, or actually physical ailments that you've caused yourself, and you have to take responsibility for the fact that this illness or this deficiency in my body is something I caused, and how you can't blame anybody else for the fact that you're here. You survived. You tried to take your life, and now you are still here. And if people know that you tried, there's always going to be that thought, and maybe that's part of
That
the
stigma.
Totally.
Of that
Yeah.
judgment that we
Yeah.
talked about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you
Yes.
mind sharing what you've gone through? Do you feel comfortable?
I do feel comfortable. I talk to my therapist. I see 2 therapists and go to a group every week. So I'm really working very hard
What group
Good
do
for
you
you.
go
to
to?
combat. It's a DBT.
And what area is that in for anyone out there?
It's dialectical behavioral therapy. So it's related to CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really about learning how.
Is this on the East Coast?
Learning how it's
like available for people?
It's available really through most outpatient programs at hospitals.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
You can usually find this at most hospitals. It's always worth a call.
Yeah.
And to the listeners, I really want to touch base that I'm so glad we're doing this today and you're here.
I know today is
a very
really
special
day.
It's Chester's birthday today. He would have been 43 years old, and he should be here.
He should, because he yelled at me. He absolutely berated me for my attempts, and that's plural.
Share with us what attempts, because I know now a little bit, and if you're comfortable with sharing
Right.
with the listeners, because there's many listeners who've tried several times.
I have tried several times to overdose, and I tried one time to shoot myself, but I just blew a hole in the wall.
Oh my God, darling.
Wow.
I have to laugh because, as my
I'm
husband
so
said,
glad you're a bad shot.
as my husband said in therapy, because he goes to therapy with me also. He's like, "How could you not succeed at that?" I'm like, "Oh, I didn't expect the kickback." So trying to a 357 Magnum
Oh my God.
backwards
I'm glad we're
is-
laughing about this
is
now.
a little kickback, and it threw me for a loop, and it went right over my head. I have to laugh at it because I feel like clearly God wants me to be here. I can't figure out why I'm here. And it reminds me, Chester, I walked in on his very first attempt. If I can speak about
Yeah.
him.
Oh,
He was approximately 11 years old, and he had a shotgun in the kitchen. And I was supposed to babysit that day after school, but she canceled. And so I came home, and he was sitting at the breakfast bar with a shotgun.
oh my God.
And he was scared that I walked in, and I was scared at what I walked in on. And from that moment on, we had each other. and we leaned on each other, and we shared these attempts and this anger that we had, and this disgust that we had for ourselves, and we shared that openly with each other. And there's a reason that babysitter, or that babysitting job canceled that day, because the world needed to know my brother.
I have never known the story, and I just never knew. Nobody's told me. I didn't know that you were still fighting this, and I didn't know he had made some attempts before. That was new news for Draven and I as well.
Yeah.
And that's hard for me.
It's a secret that is kept so close to your heart, and a part of that is that stigma. It's very big, but it's also just I'm not proud of those things that I've done. I'm weak. I feel weak because I don't know how to survive being me. And I can't speak for Chester, but we talked about that idea a lot. And just, it's not something you share.
Oh.
Had I not walked in on that, we might never have talked about it the rest of our lives. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
But because I walked in on it, it opened the door for us to talk about it. And we had a pact. And
Right.
the last attempt, which was 2 years ago for me, in August it will be 2 years. And when I was finally conscious, because talk about, the hurt, the pain that you cause yourself.
Right.
I was in a coma for 9 days. And when I came out of the coma, I could barely talk.
Okay, so you had to learn how to talk, and you had to learn how to move your arms.
I had to learn how to hold a spoon again. I could barely feed myself. For about 2 weeks,
Wow.
the only thing I ate was oatmeal because I could keep it on a spoon and get it to my mouth with making a minimal mess on my face.
I wish I had a photo of that.
I know, I'm sure.
I'm teasing.
After the first week of oatmeal, Mom was like, okay, you can't just eat oatmeal for the rest of your life. You need to practice a fork and a knife. And I was like, no, I have a whole new appreciation for 2-year-olds. I totally get why they throw fits. Because learning to do these things is freaking hard.
Yeah, frustrating.
It is hard to hold a knife and a fork. It's
Right.
hard to hold a pen and write. It's hard to walk.
Yes.
It's hard to know that there's a destination in front of you that you want to get to, and you can't get there. So I totally get 2-year-old tantrums.
Right.
Love it.
And as soon as I could talk, and Mom held the phone to my ear because I didn't have, my arms weren't functioning. I had to learn how to do basic tasks again. He yelled at me and was just like, how could you do this? We had a pact. We talked about this. We've said that we were not going to do this again. And I was like, well, but you just tried a couple months ago. And where was I? And he's like, but that's not the point. And so, this is the kind of dialogue that we had with one another.
What was your, just so the listeners know, what was your age difference? Like where?
So we're 4 years apart. I'm 4 years older than him. And
Saying he lied to me about his age, told me he was 21 when I was 22.
Oh.
I was 19.
Wow.
Just so you know. We always thought that was funny.
that
That's
always
funny.
was funny.
That
He was
is
smart.
funny.
I would never have dated him.
Same years apart as me and my brother.
Really?
Except for he was older.
He was older.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I understand that those private conversations, but I was so much younger than him.
Can I just say something because I have an opportunity to say this
Sure.
to you? I'm sorry that I didn't know. And I have a chance to say I'm sorry because I would have done everything and anything.
I don't want you to be sorry. See, I'm sorry. This is where that stigma comes in. That not only did I fail at killing myself, but I failed my loved ones. I have failed twice. And to fail in the eyes of your loved ones is almost worse than failing at the actual act of suicide.
I'm so glad you failed because you're here.
Well, and I appreciate you feeling that way.
I'm so grateful that you were not successful. Draven and I we can't lose Chester and you or any of our loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
See, I have this terrible guilt as to why did I fail and my brother did not. Why? He was so much better than me. He was amazing. I pale in comparison to my brother.
I disagree.
And
I disagree.
I
You
carry
both are
that
lovely.
every day. I carry that every
You can
day.
take that off your plate because that's not yours to bear. This is not yours to own. I've heard some disturbing things, how he's tried several times before, and I've been very pissed off that nobody's told me anything.
Extremely pissed off that the family was not consulted on that because the family should have had an opportunity to intervene.
Including, anyone that had an opportunity to intervene, we should have been privy. So that's another thing is to the listeners, when there's people, when you know someone in your family has an attempt and you promise them you're not going to say anything, that could be a little white lie. You better tell somebody because there is a fiduciary responsibility of saving a life. That is a little white lie that you're doing for the greater good to save lives. And you might have to say that in that moment. You might be younger. It might be a sibling. They might threaten you with some way, like don't tell anybody. And also, that's another stigma. Maybe they didn't come and reach out to all of us because their guilt or their fear of, oh my God, am I going to be judged for this?
Right.
Well,
It's
the
a
only
shame.
way you're going to be
only
way you're going to be judged is by not doing anything.
Exactly.
So I do have judgment against some
I
people.
have a lot of judgment
Yeah.
because some people were put in a place where they were responsible for making sure that meds were available,
Mm-hmm.
that
I didn't know that
that
either.
protocols were followed, that and that failed, and so I'm very frustrated with that, and I'm trying to come to terms with that, and try and understand the other side that maybe that stigma was felt with them because this whole thing. I mean, I
Right.
use the word stigma so frequently, but it's this huge,
It's a huge thing,
thing.
yeah.
huge.
We're
And-
probably going to have to do another podcast on it because there's
Yeah.
so
It
much
just-
information we couldn't get through.
Well, for me, Chester told me everything. And how the hell do I not know about this? That's the stigma. So much fear. And I remember him saying, when he went off to that rehab, and we all knew he didn't need to be in that rehab, he was clean and sober for a good 3.5 years, I'd say even
Yeah.
closer to 4.
Yeah.
And he told me he had dark thoughts. And that was the
Yes.
first time when Draven was 13 that he brought this up, but he convinced us, and we've talked about this before, he convinced us that, but when he went to therapy, he got back on track emotionally,
And he
he was
did.
so unhappy with all this other things, and that's why he was having it, and he convinced me that everything was great. I didn't know that there were people supposed to watch him. I didn't know there was medication. I didn't know that, and also he was very clear that those certain things on the table were embarrassing to share with your
Right.
ex-wife.
Right.
Or if I was in his shoes, that would be embarrassing for me to share with my ex-husband. You always want them to think you're
You're
doing
well.
better
Yeah.
and doing okay. And so he attempted a couple of times, and you attempted 2 years ago.
Yeah,
And
that
then,
was my last attempt.
and
There's
then-
been 8 in total
okay.
for
What?
me.
Babe,
Oh,
can you pinky swear right now? You can do this over here.
I
Can
will try
okay.
so hard to keep that. I'm trying.
I'm on her list,
I'm
right?
trying-
We're on the
yes.
list.
Yeah.
We have lists, and we talked about that
Mhm.
because you gave me that insight. And we
Mhm.
talked about how when anyone's getting dark or going down that rabbit hole, have your plan of
Right.
attack.
Right. You're my survival plan. You are
Mhm.
part of my survival plan.
Oh yeah, I'll come in blazing, kicking butt.
My husband is an amazing support. He asks me daily, did you take your meds? If something's going wrong, he's like, did you take your meds? And sometimes I have to honestly say no.
Mhm.
I haven't taken them for 3 days.
What stops you, if you don't mind me asking?
Just this desire to be normal. And I know that normal doesn't exist. But to
That
me,
makes perfect sense.
normal shouldn't be taking 8 meds a day.
Yes.
Now, is that part of surviving or just meaning health issues from your last attempt?
2 of them are health issues.
Okay.
But 6 of them are
Preventative.
preventative. They're for my mental health. And that's so hard to say it's for my mental health and not just for my mental illness.
Well, you're a survivor from abuse too. So you and your brother have been traumatized as children.
There was a lot of traumatizing events in our lives. Unfortunately, we share that. And one of our abusers abused both of us. And it wasn't until we reached adulthood that we talked about the fact that we were both abused by the same person. And I thought I was stopping him from being abused because I was getting abused. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't know that this person was going to go and abuse my brother too. I thought that if you abuse me, then that's enough, and I was protecting him, and then I wasn't protecting anybody. There was no protection from abuse.
Wow.
And so...
Oh my God.
Okay, deep breath for a minute.
But there's a lot of discussion about depression, mental illness in general being something that is genetic.
Mm.
But and from what the research I've read, it also has to do with the trauma that you've...
Trauma triggers, for sure, 100%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you are predisposed to depression, just that one in particular, let's just go with depression, and you're not triggered, you live a beautiful blessing of a life, and you don't have those triggers such as abuse of any nature, a parent's dramatic divorce, any of those things. You don't get into drugs. You don't. You lead if you could lead a nice snowflake life and never be triggered, then you'll never know the effects of having that in your DNA.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have that in your DNA and then you have multiple triggers, and you continue, your entire life is being a trigger of trauma, down to the people that are in your daily life because of how they treat you. It's double jeopardy.
Yeah.
Well, and if I'm correct, and I think I am from what Mom shared, is it runs on both sides of your family.
Yes, it does.
Well, it obviously runs on both sides of his as well.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Even though you guys have different
We have
biological fathers,
right?
but it does run on both sides.
Mhm.
But Pops adopted me, so
Right. From a very young age.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're... But am I correct? Your father was
My
successful.
biological father was successful in his life.
And you were how old?
I was 7. And I had not been allowed to see him because he was a drug addict.
Mm-hmm.
He was not a responsible adult, which is why Pops wanted to adopt me when I was very young. I was 3 when Pops adopted me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Before Chester was born.
Before Chester was born,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. And Pops was dad. He's been my father. He's my dad for my life. He's my dad.
Right.
But there is mental illness.
And then Mom, growing up, shared with Draven and I recently about 3 cousins
Yes.
on her side of the family that were successful as well.
Mhm.
And I think it was 3 girls. Or
No.
2. Oh.
I think it's 2 girls and a
boy. Cousins. So her cousins?
Yes.
Her cousins.
cousins.
Okay. And God, you guys weren't even thought of then.
No.
So they were kids in high school. From what?
I know that her last cousin that was successful, he was a grown adult. He had 2 grown children, and he just one night surprised everybody with this.
So Draven has expressed, like, Mom is, if this runs on so deep on my dad's family, on both my grandmother and grandfather's side, is this going to happen to me? And I said, no.
My kids say the same thing.
Because it's not. And just know, to anyone listening, just because it is in your family doesn't mean you are going to have those same triggers, because we're breaking the chain.
Yes.
Actually, Tobi and I talked a lot over this week being here in Arizona about how we're breaking the chain for our family, for our children, for ourselves as adults.
Yes.
I don't have the same experiences, but being adopted at birth, and I have abandonment issues from my biological mother. I have abandonment issues from my adopted parents who
Right.
you've known.
I know, right.
And I don't speak to them by choice because they're not healthy for me. It's
Exactly.
emotionally and verbally abusive.
Right.
And my son doesn't need to be, I've got to break the chain.
Yep.
So
Yes.
you're doing the same thing, and I'm so proud of us, because, like, sometimes there's a guilt there to break the chain. Like, you feel like, oh, but that's my elder, and I need to show some respect.
Right.
And we're family. We're supposed to work through these things. But no, when we become parents ourselves, we have to protect our children. So it's,
Right.
and we have to protect ourselves. Like, we're not supposed to go through life hurting and upset and
Right.
triggered all the time.
Right.
That's unhealthy for your mental health. That's unhealthy
Right.
for my mental health. That's unhealthy for your husband, your children.
Right, it trickles
Right?
down.
Yeah, it trickles and trickles down. So that I'm proud of us for that.
Because it's contagious too. I mean, that's the thing. Even if you
Yes.
weren't related, and I wasn't related to my brother, it's like the stuff that we've been reading about is very contagious because it's in the family. And I love what you guys are saying about breaking the chain, because it's exactly what needs to
And
happen to address it.